Precious Anomaly.
Hello everyone. Precious Anomaly here. Today I'm going to be talking about something kinda personal, but yet nonetheless important to discuss. I'm not going to beat around the bush here. I have cyclothymia. More specifically, rapid cycling cyclothymia. And I believe I have had this since I was a young kid. The purpose of this video is to explain and inform folks about cyclothymia while also talking about how this condition affects me and my life. Please do watch this video with an open mind, and do not assume or judge anything until you have fully watched this video in its entirety. Now before I get into the nitty-gritty of all that, it's best if I start by explaining what cyclothymia really is. 1. What is cyclothymia? Cyclothymia is a rare mood disorder characterized by emotional highs and lows far from a typical mood that causes distress in one's everyday life. It is dubbed as a milder version of bipolar. Despite this, cyclothymia isn't easy to live with. According to the DSM-5, to get diagnosed with this disorder you need to fit within these criteria as shown here. You need to have had many periods of elevated mood and periods of depressive symptoms for at least 2 years, with these highs and lows occurring during at least half that time. Periods of stable moods usually last less than 2 months. Symptoms that significantly affect you socially and symptoms that don't meet any of the criteria for bipolar disorder, major depression or another mental disorder, and that these symptoms aren't caused by substance use or a medical condition. As you can see, cyclothymia is a pretty serious condition, but unfortunately it is hard to diagnose due to how many of these symptoms can overlap with other mental disorders and conditions. This is where my story comes in. 2. How did I discover my cyclothymia? My story starts at childhood. During most of my youth I was labeled a troublemaker. I was not liked by my peers or teachers. To make things worse, I lived in an abusive, toxic environment, which limited my growth emotionally and mentally. Around the start of kindergarten I was professionally diagnosed with autism. With this, I began to receive treatment to help me better cope with the world around me. But this didn't fix everything. I was still broken somewhere in my mind and I didn't even know it. As I grew older I began to realize that the way I act was far different from other kids my age. They didn't have moments where their thoughts raced without any reason. They didn't feel like offing themselves after a single, vague criticism. They never at least once felt out of control in their own mind. But I did. Every day of my life I struggled with my own mind. But the only thing I could connect this to was my autism. I didn't know what else would be ruining my life. Everything changed when I started puberty and started my first YouTube channel. That was when I fully started showing severe symptoms that soon took over my life. Most old fans can remember when I'd post every day, when I'd take on controversial and problematic identities and terms onto myself for attention and validation, especially the days when I'd go into rampages, posting vents nearly daily, harassing others and making many people uncomfortable. It got very bad. When I turned 14, I began to really pay attention to my behavior and took track of it. Funny enough I realized that I went through quote-unquote phases. I once again thought it was just teenage hormones or just autism. I believed that until my mum came into the picture. I discovered one day that my mother had been diagnosed with bipolar. With this new information I immediately went online and began researching. Not because I suspected anything. I just wanted to check my risk levels. During this I found something unexpected. Cyclothymia. And the rest was history. Now I know why I was the way I was. I now knew that I wasn't broken, only hurting. Thanks to this, I can now take steps to help myself improve my well-being and ensure others can feel safe in my presence. Now it's time that I tell you all about my own personal experience with such a debilitating condition such as cyclothymia. 3. My experience with cyclothymia. Now before I say anything specific, I feel it is important to say that I self-diagnosed myself with cyclothymia. But before you get your pitchforks, let me explain my reasoning for this. As I had written once on my community tab, most of you guys don't know me. You can't see how my mind works nor can you see me in real life. I also live in an environment where getting a diagnosis is impossible. So just because I might not seem affected by this disorder, doesn't mean anything. Please understand that self-diagnosing, if used correctly, can be extremely helpful for those who can't afford or access a proper diagnosis itself. Now that we got that shenanigan out of the way, let's begin by talking about how each episode I have affects me. Hypomania is a type of episode that is really complicated for me. When I get into a hypomania high, my self-esteem goes off the roof. So much so that you could say I end up getting some sort of god complex. I get very euphoric and joyful without a proper reason, and I end up getting instantaneously motivated to do pretty much anything and everything at once. My thoughts can race so fast and out of control. This impedes my sleep a lot, with my mind refusing to calm down and relax. During this kind of episode, I also can get extremely impulsive, leading me to do a lot of risky things for myself and those around me. A proper example could be that if I ended up having a hypomanic episode while online, I could post or say something wildly inappropriate or offensive. At this moment of time, I find it hard to tell right and wrong, because my mind always thinks that what it's doing is always right regardless of the consequences. Admittedly, in the past I have let this get out of hand. Despite this, being in a hypomanic episode isn't all cupcakes and rainbows. Many times I can get extremely irritated and angry for no reason, but it's a kind of anger that feels like a volcano kind of anger. This sometimes leads me to yell and threaten people around me without thinking about the repercussions. In the past I have become physically violent towards others in this episode. Thankfully, I have been working very hard to manage this side of my symptoms. These symptoms are quite serious, but because of the nature of my hypomania, I assumed it was related to my autism. Oftentimes when I get a hyperfixation, my thoughts face about it, and I get way too chatty about the subject of my thoughts. But in hypomania, my thoughts aren't all surrounding one thing, nor can I shove my thoughts to the back of my mind. Although, there might be a good chance that my hypomanic episodes overlap my autistic hyperfixations and special interest indulging. According to the bipolar mood tracker chart thing, the highest a hypomanic episode has ever gotten for me is around the 11th period, which clearly isn't very good. What makes things even worse, it is extremely hard for me to tell if I'm in a hypomanic episode until the end of it, or if one of my close friends comment on my strange behavior. Even then, it's not something I can shake out of unless a full-blown depressive episode takes over right after, which by the way, almost happens every time. Now when it comes to a depressive episode, it gets very disturbing and messy. When I am like this, there is almost no way to stop the train wreck that is inevitable to occur. When I am like this, I genuinely become suicidal and violent towards myself. I loathe myself and beat myself down constantly. I have very dark thoughts that cannot be extinguished very easily. Usually I can tell exactly when I start drowning in this episode, but there isn't anything I can do to pull myself out. When I try to, I just get deeper into misery. It's very difficult to deal with, but unfortunately for me, I cannot get any treatment to help keep these dangerous symptoms down, so that leaves me having to deal with it myself. This is not really a good idea, but I don't have much of a choice as of now. According to the chart, lowest I have gotten reaches 1. So yeah, let that sink in, shall we? Sometimes I get mixed episodes. They aren't as common, but when they occur it's like a living nightmare. Like, imagine that you are so happy and jumping on the walls, and at the same time you are thinking about hurting yourself and hurting others in the most horrific ways possible. When this happens, my impulsive control is non-existent. These episodes are rare enough that it keeps me from damaging my relationships irreparably. It sucks. 4. The conclusion. As you have seen, my experience with this has been very rough. I understand if people have doubts about this, because honestly I have had doubts about what I was going through my entire life. I feared that I was misunderstanding what I was feeling. I thought that this condition would label me as a bad person or a dangerous person to be around. I never wanted to be stigmatized, so I honestly tried not believing it. It was only recently that I began to accept this uncomfortable reality that I live in. I can't change who I am. I can only try to improve from my mistakes and grow. I just wish that my younger self had the support and treatment he needed, but wishing won't do anything really. Now knowing I have CYCLOTHYMIA, I can do more to help myself. I can now try to get a real, actual diagnosis when I have the ability to, and eventually I might even get the treatment I need to overcome these difficult symptoms. But until then, I just need understanding and kindness. That's really all I need from you guys. I understand how much information I have given you, so I encourage you to ask me questions and do your own research to help you better understand what I live with. And to the people who have watched this in its entirety, Thank you. I hope you continue to stick around. I love you all. Now, I will let you all go about your daily business. Stay tuned for more animations or other nonsense from me. I'm sure you won't have very long to wait. Bye bye.